Welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. I'm Eneasz Brodsky.
I'm Steven Zuber, and today we have a guest.
My name is Liam Nolan.
Hey, Liam. Welcome to the podcast. Kind of an honor to have you here because, first of all, you just have this very velvety voice that I love listening to. It's awesome. And also, you are just a fantastic arguer. Okay, what's the podcast you're from that everybody knows you from?
I host Two Rash, Two Unadvised, where we read books, and I make much worse arguments than I'm going to make today.
Oh, I think they're different arguments. I think some of them are really good. It may be more because you do just arguments every episode, and they can't all be winners, right?
They cannot all be winners. I tried that, but now and then I get tricked. So what are you going to do? You got to commit.
How did you get tricked?
Well, sometimes I'll say something, and then later I'll think more about it.
Oh, that's classic. Always falling for that one myself.
Yeah. Keeps
made
coming back
every
on me.
argument I made during the Not Everything is a Clue podcast was right, so.
Nice.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I mean, you were there.
I don't want to argue there.
Wipe the floor with everything. It was great.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have a very, very limited memory, so I'll have to take your word for it.
Excellent.
I'm definitely not accepting that I've ever been wrong. Only that the argument wasn't good. To be clear, I don't want to.
Yeah.
All right. That
very
I can get
important
behind.
distinction. So you guys started with Terra Ignota series by Ada Palmer, which starts with Two Like the Lightning. Great series. Had a lot of fun listening to it. I actually have stalled out on the podcast because the fourth book took so long to get out that I never went back to it, and I want to not listen to the podcast until I've read the book. So at some point in the near future, I'm finally going to read that fourth book and then catch up.
That is fair. Fourth book is really, really good. I absolutely recommend Terra Ignota to any listeners of this podcast who enjoy philosophy. And I accept that that's not everyone all the time, but it's some people some of the time.
Oh, yeah. Among the rationalists who like philosophy, it is catnip.
Yeah, that's super
awesome.
fair.
That sounds great. Good sales
pitch. And now you have a very cool podcast, read-along podcast to listen as you read the books, because you guys do an excellent job of tearing into it. Not apart, because, it's good. Just digging into the meat of it.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah, we do our best. Happy to have anyone on if they think we didn't get something right. Yeah, so that is what I do. And I got a call from you last week, I think, asking if I'd talk about pea zombies.
Yeah, because this is a philosophical thing, and I know you're really good on philosophical things, and also importantly, you're really, really fun to watch argue. It almost feels like arguing is your day job. I know you're not actually a lawyer, but do you argue with people a whole lot for money or something?
I captained a college debate team for 6 years, and it was my favorite thing I've ever done. So no, but I get it.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It's fantastic watching you. Yeah. So I'm kind of in fear for our philosophical buttholes here. I get the feeling that they might be reamed.
No, it'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Okay. As long as we're on the same side as you.
Well, no one's stopping you from giving up and agreeing Chalmers was right.
Oh, is that where we're going?
That's where we're going. We should start with what exactly it is we're talking about, though. The Zombies Lesser Wrong post is maybe his longest. It would be a good thing to quicken. It's at least got to be top 3 of the longest sequence posts. And as we're reading through it, Eneasz and I decided that there'd be way too much to cover in our usual segment that we try to keep about 20, 25 minutes. Unless we just really don't want to do it justice and say, summarize the post by saying Eliezer doesn't think philosophical zombies is coherent. But it seems like it's fun to dive into. And there's kind of this meta question behind it about what the use is of these kinds of thought experiments.
And in our personal lives, we just recently had a podcast episode where we talked with Bentham's Bulldog on similar-ish philosophical grounds. He's a philosophy student right now. He has a whole post that he's written about how philosophical zombies are the best idea in the world.
Wait, really?
So, yeah.
Oh, I didn't find that one.
He starts beef with Eliezer, where basically says, what are you talking about? Zombies are awesome. We should all believe in them. So, I mean, that is a very quick summary and doesn't do it justice. But I think it's such a crazy argument anyway.
Well, one thing that trips me up on these sorts of things is why is it even useful? And I think trips a lot of people up. I know people who aren't interested in philosophy, and then I was telling them about this, and they'd ask, okay, so what's the point of all this? And I was like, that's a good question. So, you lay out what philosophical zombies are, which I think we have before, but, in a sentence, it's imagine a universe exactly like ours, where there's people and everything, but they aren't conscious. the way that we are. And the idea of the lights are on, but no one's home. So they say they, enjoy the taste of food, but they don't really enjoy it because they don't really taste it because they aren't really, sentient.
Yeah. Do you want to read the first bullet point from the post, which is the way Eliezer sums up zombies?
Sure. Your zombie, in the philosophical usage of the term, is putatively a being that is exactly like you in every respect: identical behavior, identical speech, identical brain, every atom and quark in exactly the same position, moving according to the same causal laws of motion, except the zombies are not conscious.
Yeah.
So I was laying that out to somebody, and then they just basically asked, like, so what's the point of that argument? I think what Chalmers is trying to get at is that because we can imagine such a circumstance, and that'll be something that we'll dig into, is whether or not we're actually imagining that, but suppose we could, it's therefore possible, probable, intuitive, any of the above, that consciousness is not explainable by atoms, quarks, and the causal laws of motion.
Is this too early to push back on you a little bit?
No. I'm trying to set the groundwork and make sure I got my head on straight here.
Yeah, the foundations are super important. Push back early immediately.
Oh, great. So I read through, in prep for this, some of A Conscious Mind, or The Conscious Mind, the book Chalmers wrote where he talks about zombies. I think there's ultimately a big thing I'm going to come back to a few times is I'm pretty sure Yudkowsky in these sequences, somewhere I don't think he's quite got what the important part of the zombie argument was. And I think you actually touched on like one of the reasons that his conclusions don't feel like they're engaging with it to me. The point of the zombies argument isn't that if we can imagine it, it's plausible. In fact, the point of the zombies argument is that if it's coherent, then he says it must be the case that consciousness, and when Chalmers talks about consciousness, he really means like experience itself, as opposed to the sort of listener observing the act of listening that I think Yudkowsky comes back to a lot. But he says if it's conceivable that there is a zombie, then there is no way that purely physical explanations can account for everything. So it's definitely a very strong statement of deductive logic.
All right, what does he mean by conceivable? Because as Han Solo says, I can imagine a lot.
Yeah, so there's sort of two versions of conceivability that he discusses, and I think that Yudkowsky touches on. The first is like prima facie conceivability. So it's something that like I can kind of imagine if there wasn't gravity. And if I imagine there isn't gravity, I guess I'd float. But once we dig into that, well, if I imagine there isn't gravity, actually the entire universe doesn't hold together. And there's all kinds of kind of cascading problems that happen beyond that.
Right. It's like imagining that matches don't strike in a fantasy world because of physics being different, and then realizing that means you can't breathe either.
Yeah, it feels intuitive, but it doesn't actually work. The other idea of conceivability that Chalmers cares about is ideal conceivability, or what he sometimes talks about as like metaphysical possibility. And this is everything that is every way that the universe could actually be. Every set of laws that could make the universe coherent. So it's like the version of the multiverse that you get in Marvel, where there's just... Actually, no, they changed that. I can't reference Marvel anymore because they have a very specific timeline.
Oh no, they tried to put a timeline on their shit?
Yeah.
They try to do this every couple decades, and it never works out.
I think Loki gets into it at length.
Yeah, at the end of season 2 of Loki, they kind of do some timeline stuff, but, leave that aside. Go with the Marvel analogy. I need it.
Sure. So we have, if there's any set of laws, if there's any way that a universe can be that isn't logically impossible, then we might say that that's conceivable, ideally conceivable if it holds up under reflection. And I mean, you can nitpick on that a little bit, but that's much closer to what Chalmers is actually talking about than... I find Yudkowsky spends a lot of time here like discussing the plausibility of zombies. And I completely agree. They're super implausible. It's a very weird idea. But I don't think they're actually inconceivable.
Just jumping with the multiverse thing, you'd said, correct me if I am paraphrasing this wrong. Sorry, actually just repeat it because I don't want to butcher it.
So when Chalmers is talking about metaphysical possibility, he's not... The reason for the meta, and I know people hate the word metaphysics. I get it. A lot of it is really bad. But when he's discussing metaphysics, he doesn't mean this is something that could exist in our universe. He doesn't even necessarily mean this is something that could exist in a universe like ours. he means the much stronger statement, this is a way that things could conceivably be. Am I drawing like a clear distinction between those two? Like there's kind of a weak feasibility and then a strong feasibility?
Yes, I think so.
I think so. Just to use another multiverse example, Everything Everywhere All at Once has a scene where our protagonist and Jamie Lee Curtis, they've got hot dog fingers. And the thing about that is that that's supposed to suggest that, like, okay, everything from history straight to this, including their parents meeting and copulating, having the same offspring and everything, going back to the dawn of life, happened the exact same way, including having clothes with buttons, but they all have they all have hot dog fingers that are edible. Like, yes, that's imaginable, but that's obviously insane, right?
Wait. The hot dog fingers weren't edible.
They definitely ate them.
They're made of hot dog. What do you mean?
They ate them?
Yeah, it was gross.
I do not remember them eating them. I remember them sucking on them, like you would suck on people's fingers in real life.
I thought they were full of mustard or something. Well, in any case, let's run with it because I can imagine them eating, right?
Okay.
So I can imagine them eating these fingers, and again, having clothes that they could know that there's no way they could put on themselves because they can't use their wiggly hot dog fingers to fasten the buttons. Like, what would Chalmers say of that universe?
My intuition, at the risk of speaking for a guy who's better at philosophy than me, is that he would probably say that's like prima facie conceivable. It's an idea I can hold in my head, but when I dig down on like, I don't know, maybe there's a way you can explain this to me such that I'll accept there are no logical contradictions in hot dog finger world. But I don't think I'm not coming up with it on the spot.
Well, if hot dog finger world doesn't violate any laws of physics, it should be possible, right?
Yeah. I'm not sure which ones it should violate, or which different sets of laws of physics are possible, because I don't actually care about violating our physics. That's fine.
Right, okay, because laws of physics could be different as well.
Exactly.
Okay.
I know I'm hammering on this a little bit, but I think it's actually really important to be clear about what Chalmers is talking about when he says zombies are possible. Because it's definitely not, like, maybe my neighbor doesn't have a brain. That super isn't what he means.
Right.
No, and he's not talking about people in our universe even, it seems like. He's talking about him next in the universe next door, or his neighbor in the universe next door. And I don't want to beat this too long either, I think it is important though. Like, I can imagine the hot dog universe, but I don't think that tells me anything useful, and I can't glean anything useful from it. Like, just because I can imagine it and I can dig into it, and it does seem absurd. Maybe I can point to the fact that I could find something in the evolutionary history that would make no sense and thus make that universe impossible to actually exist, but not impossible to imagine. But it's possible to imagine, I think. Right? I mean, it was definitely possible to put on a movie.
Yeah. No, it's definitely I think you're getting right up to the core intuition that makes the zombies work, which is normally you're completely right. Like, this doesn't get us anything. Oh, well, cool, you've postulated hot dog fingers, but what now? Chalmers' argument then follows, because I'm able to postulate a universe that looks much like ours, and I know that often the example is like every atom and quark in exactly the same position, but I don't actually think that's like necessary. But let's say it's that one. I'm going to give a much weaker version of Zombies universe that I think still holds later. If that's the case, I can make a universe that to all quarks looks like it's the same as this other one. And it's conceivable that we don't have experience. There's no way that it is to be something in zombie universe, just like there's no way that it is to be a rock, which is distinct from the listener hearing himself listen. Chalmers is really concerned.
That's the ridiculous claim. Like,
okay.
I can see agents acting like they're conscious without actually being conscious, right? Like Peter Watts's vampires, or even LLMs. If they get really good and they're indistinguishable from conscious creatures, we still aren't necessarily sure they're conscious. Maybe, I don't know. That's something to talk about at a future date when they get even better. But like in the next door universe where there is an Eneasz talking to a Liam, and we are quark identical, then obviously their consciousness can exist.
Okay, so let me circle back to that.
Conscious.
Let me finish the 3 steps to make zombies happen, and then I'll come back because I think this is salvageable even in that case.
Okay.
So we have, let's say, universe prime is like us right now actually talking. And then we also have some other universe, which resembles this universe in many important ways, but doesn't have this additional feature of experience. If we accept, for the sake of getting to the end of this sentence...
Wait, which additional...
experience. Conscious. This holds for any additional thing that you can posit. I think
Does it have the same quirks going through the same motions? Like, is this mirror universe having us talking right now and the same things are happening in our brains?
Let me be slightly clearer.
Okay.
I'll only talk to the mirror universe. I claim separately I do not need a mirror universe for the zombies argument to hold. So mirror universe, yes, 100%, everything's moving exactly the same way. Chalmers' claim is, if I can have two, and one of them includes experience and one doesn't, so one of them is universe prime, and one of them is not universe prime, should that be possible, and we can come back to whether it is, but should that be possible, it must be the case, it cannot not be the case, that there is some additional feature of reality which is not captured by quirks.
Oh, yeah, that's just logically true, but also stupid to say that those things would be exactly the same, and yet one of them would be missing consciousness for no reason.
I can circle back on reason, but that's the core argument that Zombies is making, and it's not one that I feel like is directly spoken to in the Yudkowsky posts, now that I've actually read Chalmers' case about it. Because when I first just read Yudkowsky, I felt like Chalmers was probably a moron.
Isn't that literally what Eliezer says at least once in these three posts, possibly multiple times, that the fact that the particles are moving in this way is where the consciousness comes from?
I think he does say that a few times.
Okay. In which case, if you believe that, then as long as the particles are moving this way, consciousness arises in any universe that has them moving that way.
Why?
Because that is literally what created the consciousness.
But we could have totally different fundamental laws of physics.
I mean, we couldn't if the particles are interacting and moving the same way.
Well, I mean, Chalmers argues for like a weird parallel. Chalmers would try to make the case that consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe, behaving in a law-bound manner according to the location of particles. So it interacts with particles, but is not itself made of particles and may be very difficult to access or maybe impossible to access via physical means.
Why in God's name would you want to invent that? Why would you say that when particles move in this particular location, then the fundamental consciousness of the universe is invoked and you become conscious, as opposed to when particles move in this particular way, that is what consciousness is?
I think there's two things I might want to say to that. One of them is that doesn't sound like you're actually explaining experience. And I think the second is, would you guys be willing to accept like a spectrum of consciousness?
Totally. I usually do, yeah.
Okay, so we can have a spectrum. Do you think it's possible to conceive of someone who's missing some aspects of consciousness?
Yeah.
Hold on,
I sometimes take drugs.
Well, I definitely, I think there's a spectrum of whatever it is that I gesture towards when I use the word consciousness. I think that grasshoppers have more of it than rocks, and mice have more of it than grasshoppers. But kind of picture myself like missing a feature. Yes. Younger me at single digits wasn't able to think recursively, for example. I think that's a feature that might be important. What sort of features are you talking about?
I guess some of my confusion in this little chunk of the conversation is I'm not actually sure what it would mean to have a spectrum of consciousness. And I think I established a little while ago that when I'm talking about consciousness in this conversation, I'm talking about like the fact of experience and not necessarily anything about reflecting on one's own mortality. So like, what would it mean for a grasshopper to have less experience than I have?
Oh, I see what you're saying. You mean just just to use the word to trigger Inyas, just what would it mean for its qualia to be like less than mine?
Yeah, what even in concept would that be? Because we're not discussing intensity. You're saying they have less of it?
No, that's a good question. I was going to say I could imagine myself having more of a sensorium, but that would just be brighter lights. But we're talking about the lights being on or not, right?
Well, yeah. What would it mean to have? because brighter light, this is an intensity claim, right? I can imagine a less intense pain, but what would it mean to have less qualia? Is that even coherent?
I personally think it is due to, well, a number of things, but have you guys read the recent ACX post on self-awareness?
I don't know,
was
actually.
It? Consciousness as recursive reflections? I'll go ahead and just give a real brief summary of it right here. It's a fascinating post, and it actually was not written by Scott Alexander. This is one of the very few guest posts that he has by Daniel B. I really hate trying to pronounce names because I'm so terrible at it. Bootger? It's got one of those umlauts over it. He has a guest post on ACX about basically what thoughts are and what qualia is. Real fast overview is that thoughts are patterns of correlated neuronal firing activity. We got neurons on our heads. One fires, it makes other neurons fire, and then they fire off in a pattern, and that corresponds to something happening. And patterns of these neural spikes running through the same brain can meet, and when they fire into each other, and sometimes they merge when they meet, sometimes they don't. When they do merge, that can lead to things like a series of spikes happening from the photons entering your eyes, turning into the concept of a word in your brain. And maybe that turns into a memory or something. The post is very long. A pattern that holds a lot of these spikes together into a thought is a thing that'll oscillate around your brain. Like even the slowest possible pattern travels from one side of your head to the other in less than a second. So any thought that is more than 1 second has to circle around the brain in a repeating pattern. In a bit of a synchronized rhythm. And he basically says that there's some of these are qualia. Some of them are thoughts that are reflecting on the rest of the brain. And any of those self-representations and thoughts turn into me, because thoughts don't think I am a thought. It just feels like I am me. So the idea of qualia comes out of neural information processing, very much the same way that biology arises out of chemistry. The chains of chemistry build on each other to create biology, and the chains of neural activation and oscillating patterns within the brains can reflect upon each other and achieve self-reflection, and that is what brings about consciousness.
So I think that's like a fun argument for self-reflection, but I think self-reflection is different. Totally independent from anything Chalmers cares about. And in fact, despite like the vague implications that might be made in the post, you can buy into the zombie argument while also thinking free will is stupid, and obviously it's only physical laws dictating what we do.
Okay. The idea of recursion there is valuable and interesting, but I don't think it addresses the question, because like I can imagine...
I think it addresses...
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I think it addresses the grasshopper question at least a bit, because grasshoppers' brains are literally smaller and have less neurons, and so they will just have less ability to have as many oscillating patterns going at once within their head. So they may indeed just have less capability for qualia intensity or number of qualia going at once.
I guess the number of qualia to me... So I think this is valuable. Maybe we are pointing at two different things, because like on the one hand, it's either like something to be something, or it's not, right? Like it's not like anything to be a snowflake or a rock, but it is like something to be a grasshopper or a mouse. And that sounds like just a binary statement. We can add gradations on top of that, right? As far as complexity of the kinds of experiences one can have, or even the range of experiences. Maybe some beings are only experience heat and lack thereof, right? But we experience that in addition to, sensation of where our limbs are and sight and smell and all that. But that seems different than saying that the thing that only detects heat is not conscious.
And I think that's the thing that Chalmers is really trying to talk about. And that's the thing that I don't feel gets addressed really strongly by rationalists talking about P-zombies, is he's not talking, he's uninterested in questions of self-reflection or the complexity of thought. But it's really weird that there's a way that it is to be a mouse. Is there a way that it is to be a plant?
Can I shit on philosophy for just a second here? Okay, so I think the reason there's a way of being a mouse or whatever is literally because mice have information processes going on within them which in our cases are these oscillating neural spike patterns, because we have brains and mice have brains. Mm-hmm. Those oscillating patterns is literally what it's like to be something is in the physical world. And this is relatively new. This is at least new to me. The problem with philosophy is they say, this is very mysterious. There must be some kind of ghost. Let's go on forever about it. Whereas someone like Eliezer looks at it and says, no, that's obviously ridiculous. What are you even talking about? It's physics, duh. And he doesn't have to know that it's, that it happens to be neural spikes and running in oscillations in a brain. He can just say, stop wanking yourself mentally. That this is obviously silly. You don't need to postulate crazy made up things. And that is my biggest problem with philosophy, that rather than just saying we don't know, but everything else has reduced to physics, and we're pretty sure this will too, they're like, oh, but there has to be magic ghosts in the universe because we could imagine not having these magic ghosts. And nobody says anything along the lines of, hey, maybe there's something going on in the neurobiology of the brain that we just don't know about yet.
I don't think this is asking about magic or ghosts.
Okay.
But I'm not sure which thing I said that made you think I'm talking about magic or ghosts.
Well, when you said it's weird that it's like something to be a mouse, it's only weird because you don't know that. I don't want to overstate this case too much. Like, this is not something that has been proven yet. At the end of the post, he says, here's some ways that we could investigate this and do experiments on these claims to see how likely they are to be true. This is right now mostly a glorified hypothesis that looks plausible, but experiments actually have to be done, right? So I don't want to say this is the actual truth.
It also just sort of sounds like LLMs are conscious in that framing, but I'll leave that aside.
I mean, possibly.
Yeah, I was going to have to come back to that.
This is an issue. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that, because, yeah. All right, well, let's move past it, though.
Yeah. So I don't want to say that this is proven. It is certainly not. He proposes ways to test it. But importantly, when you said, like, what's it like to be a mouse, isn't that kind of weird and mysterious? I mean, only because we don't know or didn't have the hypothesis of its oscillating patterns of neural spikes. The problem I have is people saying, wow, that's so weird and mysterious. Let's do philosophy to it and tie ourselves in these knots and get nowhere, as opposed to let's keep doing more science and finding out what's going on in the brain.
I think it's worth noting, just in case, Liam, you didn't know, Eneasz has never grasped, not to say, like, this sounds like I'm putting it down, and I'm totally not.
Is it a hard problem thing? I'm picking up on that.
Right, exactly.
Oh, yes.
Eneasz has never seen the hard problem as hard. And so
right.
I think that's the thing, is, like, the oscillating neural spikes and whatever, mice have them, we have them, rocks don't. But so I'm not postulating that there's anything magical or mysterious that I can say there's something that's like to be a mouse. I'm saying that that's true, or that's almost certainly true.
Well,
and it's almost certainly true that there's nothing it's like to be a rock.
I'm not convinced there's something it's like to be a mouse. I don't know why I would think that.
Why so?
I don't know why I would think it.
Because they have brains?
So?
I guess I see them, they problem solve, they seek mates, they enjoy things, like, we seem to have a lot in common.
Trees problem solve with their root systems. Magnets seek mates. So you have a lump of neurons all together, so we're assuming there must be a way that it is to be that? Or, I don't know, that feels like a leap. I think the only one I'm convinced there's gotta be a way that it is to be is people. And the only reason that you've got me on that is that the fact there is a way that it is to be a people is the single thing that I'm convinced I know.
Because of yourself, your own experience.
Yeah.
You don't think you could be fooled?
If we're going to say we can be fooled about our own existence, I think then everything's off the table. But yeah, we can leave everything non-person or non-humans aside for the sake of the conversation. I don't think that anything that I've said or that you said hinges on. Because you asked about gradations, and so I thought of lesser quote unquote animals with smaller brains.
Yeah,
but
no, I just think gradations can reveal sort of a mistake that I've seen people make, where I think if you imagine it as a spectrum, you're thinking about the wrong thing. So I think if you think Chalmers has a spectrum of consciousness, I think you've misunderstood the thing Chalmers means when he says consciousness, which isn't like recursive thought. He doesn't care about recursive thought.
It's just having experiences.
It's just experience. So, like, why do I experience? Yeah, it's weird.
Right.
It's very
and
odd.
I see what you're saying. I think that it is important that we hammered that out, because that is like, I've been in various degrees of consciousness, like in your studies taking drugs, but I've also, like you wake up in the middle of the night to go pee or whatever. Like sometimes you don't come fully online. You're just as awake as it takes to get the job done or whatever. Maybe you're just rolling over in bed, but like you're not like fully awake. You know what I mean? But you experience what it's like to be laying there and turn over and, fall back asleep. Or you don't experience falling back asleep, but my point stands. So the gradation there doesn't really matter. It's the on off of like this thing's conscious or it's not.
Right. And the argument is like totally useless if we're talking about anything that can be a gradation. The formal logic of it is pretty airtight, given that we're talking about the same set of words. And consciousness is a really important word in there.
I wanted to clarify this. Is Chalmers specifically, does he say that if there's gradations rather than on-off, then his argument collapses?
I don't know. That might be later in the book. I didn't finish the book. I'm willing to state firmly that it's true, though.
You literally think that there's somewhere a line between something that is fully, completely conscious and something that is not?
I'm saying that even asking that question kind of suggests that we're talking about different things with the word conscious.
Yeah, because I that just seems like a silly thing to think.
Is there a line where something goes from not existing to existing?
No, of course not.
Well, then no, of course not. Then there's no gradient where consciousness slowly begins to happen. No, of course not. It just is or isn't. For the same reason something can't not exist or exist. Because when I say consciousness, I mean, why is there experience? Why is there a way that it is like to be? That's the way that it is like to be is the only thing he's talking about.
Again, I think this comes back to me being very confused as to why anybody would be confused about that. That's literally what your neurons are doing. They're processing information.
So's my computer.
Yeah, your computer doesn't do it nearly in the same, well, unless you're running an LLM. Your computer does not do it in the same way as brains do, where there's these interlocking and interweaving patterns. It's very much a single step-by-step execution thing. And I do worry about LLMs maybe starting to get close to conscious.
Why? Is it just because they can talk? It's just matrix multiplication, right?
Right, I understand what you're saying. And no, it's not just the talking, because there's lots of computers that can do something like talking. It's the way that the information is processed within them that starts to look similar to how information is processed within biological brains.
Can I ask you a brief follow-up question? Can you imagine an LLM that isn't conscious?
Yeah.
Can you imagine one that is?
Yeah.
And you think they're both coherent?
Yeah.
I think you must accept dualism.
No, it would depend on how complex the LLM is, and I also think that it would be a gradient. Like the ones we have right now may be already borderlining on consciousness of insects, possibly, maybe a little more than that.
So you think they have experience?
I don't know. I think it's not beyond the realm of possibility.
Okay, I'm gonna make up a new word.
Okay.
And it's gonna be for things that it's gonna be for the fact of experience. And I'm going to call it blamal will be the fact that something has a way to be it, a way that it is to be that. So I think I have blamal, and I also have complicated recursive thoughts and consciousness.
Don't we just have the word qualia for that?
Sure. I'm going to stretch qualia a little bit sometimes, because I don't necessarily care about any specific qualia. But yeah, okay, sure. Then Chalmers is only ever talking about qualia. Chalmers believes qualia is what consciousness is, by which I mean the qualia is the part that makes it a hard question, as opposed to just, well, obviously there's a pile of neurons.
I thought this dive-in might hammer the hard problem of consciousness home for anyone who it still wasn't landing for, but I wonder if maybe we should kind of move forward with the zombie thing. We had some pre-episode chatter about tangents, and now you've got me all self-conscious, Inyash. So
no, I'm sorry. This is. I guess this is my fault. Although
no,
it's kind of. It seems to be central.
That's my point. Is that a lot of our digressions are central, or at least they're important cruxes, and so.
Stephen, what is your opinion on this? Can insects have less qualia than full-ass grown adults?
I think that the way that I understand qualia is that it's a binary sort of thing. You're either experiencing or you're not. Like you can have more or less pain, but experiencing pain is a yes or no. I think that I always called consciousness the C word. You know, typically the people mean cunt, but when in this context, it raises the flag of you just dropped the C word there, and now we've got to have this whole conversation. Because it means a lot of things to a lot of people, and I think people use them interchangeably. And I think that happens a lot in these sort of discussions. Like I think it might come up in the zombie stuff. So yeah, I think qualia is an on-off switch. You know, recursive, full consciousness. You know, like we talked about with the snake cult.
Yeah, idea. That's different.
Like that's next level, but it's still we still use the word conscious for that, right? But yeah, so I do think it's something that there's something it's like to be a mouse or a bug or whatever. But you know, I don't think anything that we're going to be talking about hangs on my thinking that about other animals. But I do think that that's also the case with people.
I was told that whether there's gradations is very important to this, and I think that there very clearly are. But I guess we're not going to resolve that, and we should move on. Is that correct?
Well, is it important?
Well, you said if there are gradations, then the argument falls apart entirely. And I'm willing to not fight about this because I don't know what we could possibly resolve, but also I don't want to go forward saying that I accept that this is a binary on-off because I don't.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. As far as tying this to zombies, like I think all the actually really need to take is that it's possible for there to be on and off. I don't think actually the spectrum really matters there because zombies are off. It doesn't, you know, they're not 1 out of 100. They're 0, and we're 1, or we're 100, right? So
yeah.
I think that's sufficient, but I could be missing something. I'm more philosophically sympathetic than the average rationalist, so I don't want to not give it like a fair shake. But I do think that the zombie thing is a really interesting case example of like maybe this isn't a valuable use of hundreds of pages of book, but maybe it is. So
I think I want to try to make the case later that if you accept this good version of the zombies argument, then I think I can extend it even if we're willing to allow so if we allow a gradation in experience, I think it's important that Chalmers' idea of consciousness is just experience and the fact of experience. But I think I can make the same argument even if you have someone who's just like severely disabled.
I don't know if I'm being too physicalist and too obtuse here about it, but the fact of experience is the things that's happening inside the brain. So, like, when he says down to the quark level, the exact same things are happening in both brains, it's like you're telling me that there's experiences happening. Like, I don't know why you'd first tell me that experiences are happening by pointing to the particles moving in the exact same way, and then lie to me and say, but experiences aren't happening, when I can clearly see the particles moving in the same way.
The idea is the conceivability argument, right? Like, you can imagine that I'm not conscious, and yet you can't... I guess you could also imagine that I'm operating on a different kind of physics than you are, but... I think you can do both at the same time, right? Assume that we're operating the same physics, and that I'm not actually conscious.
By that you mean you aren't having experiences, right?
Yes.
I can imagine that in the fact that, like, I can imagine I'm actually talking to a very complicated program right now over the computer. If I were to see you in real life, I could maybe imagine that I'm talking to a cunningly built android that for some reason runs on different thought processes that don't experience things. But like, if someone were to show me the particles inside your brain and be like, oh no, there's neurons there and they're firing in these patterns, then I could not in fact imagine that you aren't having experiences because I can see those experiences happening in your brain right there.
I see. So you're thinking like if like we had like a super MRI that showed my neurons lighting up when I saw red, that would be sufficient for you to be like, oh, okay, we know it. He's conscious.
Yes.
What about you're a physicalist?
Yes.
So let me try to build up to this. Can you imagine a world which is without lumps of neurons?
Mm-hmm.
It would follow the same rules as this world.
Okay, where just neurons never evolved?
Sure. Yeah, there happens to not be neurons.
Okay.
I'm not speaking to a society. I'm speaking to like a conceivable way that the world may have been instead of the way that it is.
Right. We have a planet with no humans on it, no mammals.
Okay. And then further, without postulating that anything begins having experience, would you be comfortable positing cells?
Sure.
Okay. So we have like plants, maybe?
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Plants seem to make decisions, right?
No.
Oh, I have fun news. Plants seem to make decisions.
All right. Depending on what you mean by seem, I would argue that they have reactions to their environments, which is not quite the same as the way we think of decisions as humans.
Oh. All right. Let's just talk about reactions to their environment.
Okay.
I have plants, they can react to their environment. They can look for the sun, they can build roots, et cetera, et cetera. Now, let's say I have something a little bit more complicated than a plant, but it still just reacts to its environment.
Okay. I see where we're going. Have you read Blindsight?
No.
Okay, Peter Watts has basically beings that look identical to humans, but they are these plants that you speak of that just react to their environment in such incredibly complex ways, and yet they have no consciousness at all. Which is a thing that I absolutely can imagine. I guess if physics were different enough, it's.
Oh, great, good, yeah. Physics is different.
It's a sci-fi concept. Yeah.
I didn't think this was this easy. Physics is definitely different.
Okay, they aren't processing information in the same way that we are, and that may lead to very complex reactors that don't actually have thoughts and experiences. I don't know. It's a very hard bullet for me to bite. When I read the novel, I'm like, okay, I'm accepting it for the sake of the novel because it makes a damned fun story. I don't actually consider it conceivable in reality, but. What about maybe in a different physics with different creatures?
So it might be not conceivable classic, but it might be, as I think I set forth at the very beginning, metaphysically conceivable?
Yes.
Okay. Are you able to conceive of something like those plants, but which is conscious?
Yeah.
If you can conceive, can you conceive of a thing that looks just like the plant but is conscious?
Yes. I mean, well, okay, hold on a sec. By looks just like the plant, do you mean it's only got like wood pulp and all the various things that we have in our current plants?
I haven't read the book. Do they?
Oh, I'm talking about earth plants right now.
Oh no, I'm still on your sci-fi plants.
Yeah, do the let's do that too, but I'm also curious, do Peter Watts's do his zombies do we know if they have brains? Like does it dig into that?
They do have brains, which is why I don't buy it in real life. I accept it for the sake of the story because it's a really good story, right? Mm-hmm. His aliens are much more believable because at that point, like, we can't really tell what their brains are, whatever. I'm willing to accept, like, okay, yeah, these things might literally be not conscious. But the ones that look just like humans, and when you bash their heads in, they got brains inside, that's the one where I'm like, okay, I'm accepting it for the sake of the story. Let's move on.
Well, they don't need to look that much like humans. As long as they're making complicated decisions, and you can imagine one version of them that makes these complicated decisions due to purely mechanistic. They're following a script. And you can also imagine a version that's making these decisions due to following a script, except it experiences as it does it. Mm-hmm. Then, the argument for zombies says the universe is not reducible to purely physical means.
I don't think they would look atom for atom identical. I think the ones that have experiences would be vastly more complicated than the ones that are just reactors.
Why?
Because you have to have a complicated recursive information processing system to get the experience of having an experience.
And an inherent function of recursive complicated systems is experience?
Yeah.
Why is that?
That's what happens when thoughts try to reflect on other thoughts. Oh, right. We're not doing self-awareness. Sorry. Why is that? That's what it's like to have information processes inside of your physical body.
See, I guess I think it's totally conceivable that whatever Claude is not conscious. I also think it's conceivable that it is. I think that this makes the point. Like I'm not sure exactly how much lifting the word complex is doing in your framing there, but like it's complicated. You know, it takes more than 5 minutes to explain to somebody how it works. It probably takes at least that long to explain to somebody how a human brain works. Like it's. I think I could buy that it's conscious or that it's not, and if not 3.5 sonnet, you know, maybe 4.0 will be able to convince me that it's conscious, right? Is this helping to illustrate the point at all, Liam, or is this a digression?
No, I actually think you're totally on the right track. It's just very difficult to explain this. Like this, the whole argument hinges on the hard problem being the hard problem end of thought. Like, you don't need to have any particular opinion on it, but I think you do need to think that the hard problem is a problem.
Hard? Okay.
I don't actually necessarily think you need to think it's hard. I think Chalmers gives like a reasonable account for how we could do a version of dualism that doesn't strike me as weird and magic focused.
Okay.
But you do need to be like, you need to see that it's hard to explain experience through arranging particles. I don't see a way in principle to do that set in a satisfying way. There might be one, but I don't see it.
I don't think it's any harder to explain than explaining why there's neuron activations when certain frequencies of light hit your retinas.
But that seems easy to that seems almost trivial to explain, actually.
Yeah, I don't think that the hard problem is a problem. I apologize.
When I look at neurons being activated by light, I can look at the neurons and I can look at the light, and I can see a mapping between them. Okay. But I don't have any access to the concept of experience. And the concept of experience is like the most fundamental fact I'm able to know about reality. In a way that isn't true of other... It's not like the idea of God.
Well, hold on. When the neurons in the brain are activated by the light, that is the experience. Like, there's nothing left to explain.
You know, I've had this conversation before, and we've had it at beat-ups and stuff, and it's just hard to get to land. And I'm trying to think of, like, when you say, like, that's just what neurons do, or that's just the neurons lighting up, I mean, it just sounds like if... I remember, like, well, I'll leave out the digression and just say, like, it's like saying, well, that's just what TVs do when you know, there's a movie playing on it. And I ask, well, how's it working? Well, you turn it on and the power comes on, and then the screen comes on and you see the pictures. Like, you're not telling me how it works. Saying the neurons are doing it doesn't actually explain anything.
Well, that feels more like saying, I tell you that the electron from the CRT tube flies out of there. It hits what is it? God, I don't even remember how the old TVs work anymore. But it hits the cell on the screen, and the cell lights up with a certain color based on whatever the frequency it was hit with, and that makes a light. And you get a whole bunch of those in a row, and those make lights of different patterns. And then you're telling me, yeah, but you're not telling me how the TV works. I'm like, but I just did. Like, what more do you need to know than that the electron gets shot out of the thing and hits the screen and lights up the cell, and that cell emits light?
I think, like, the analogy that I'm picturing is like, you know, you open up the back of the TV and imagine that all the electric activity back there is visible light. And you're saying, see all those lights moving around? That's how the TV works. It's like, that doesn't actually tell me how the TV works.
You can get into more detail and you say, when the electricity moves through this wire, it makes... I don't know exactly how a cathode ray tube works. Like, I don't know what makes the electrons shoot out. Someone, I'm sure, does, but they would tell you that the electricity goes here. This warms up the tube. It shoots out a stream of lights there. We can aim it with magnets to go in a row back and forth across the screen. And that is explaining to you how it works, right? It's not just like, look at these parts. These parts make it work. People can tell you the actual details.
Exactly. Yeah, the TV problem is solved, but like neuronal activity to consciousness isn't. Right.
Well, if we're just talking about an experience, that part is solved because the experience of seeing, a red light is those neurons firing in the brain. Like, you can look at the neurons firing and you're like, yep, there's the experience happening right there.
What would you change to make consciousness no longer a thing?
I'd use some sort of thing to knock people out.
No.
Is anesthetic the right word?
You get to alter. You're God now. You're rebuilding the world.
Okay.
Finally.
You don't want consciousness.
Right.
You want no consciousness, but you do want complicated lumps of neurons. You're just a huge fan of groups of neurons, so you can't cut that. What are you going to change about the world to make it so that those no longer produce consciousness?
Well, if you were God, what would you change about the world to make it so that bachelors can be married?
I would just redefine marriage and I'd be done.
Okay, all right. I think you get at what I'm trying to say, though. Like, you can't have both the neurons that are functioning properly and no consciousness.
Sure. Well, I can have the cathode ray tube, but no television.
Yeah, if you don't turn it on.
Well, maybe I just change... phosphorus no longer emits a very bright light. Now it's kind of dull, so the TV doesn't work. Do that for consciousness.
Okay, make it so sodium ions don't have a charge, and so the brain doesn't propagate when the action potentials change across the cell membranes. Like, you'd have to actually break them so that they don't do the thing.
Can you more directly target Can you more directly target just experience?
No. You'd have to actually break the physical mechanism.
And the only way to break that mechanism is to break neurons connecting.
There's maybe some other things you could do, but ultimately you would have to make just not work anymore. Like, how do you make water not wet? You take away a hydrogen atom, and now it's not water anymore.
Huh.
I think people just don't grok how physicalist I am. Like,
you'd seem
it's like trying to make it so a match will not strike. You have to literally break phosphorus or break how the laws of physics operate so that the things don't operate anymore.
Well, but in describing how I would break the laws of physics to make phosphorus strike, I think I necessarily need to actually understand what phosphorus is doing. Whereas you just feel like shockingly credulous about experience, just like it's the most natural. Obviously, that's how this works. I don't need to understand the mechanism. What do you mean you're confused about the mechanism? I put 5 neurons together. So I don't know how to attack this.
Okay. I see what you're saying. I am certainly not a neurobiologist. I do not know the intricacies of how the neurons work with each other. Mm-hmm. But I am quite convinced that the things they are doing when they set up these oscillating waves of neural spikes is what experience is.
Okay, and it's oscillating waves. So you don't think an LLM can have experience?
I am unsure about the LLM question.
How are they getting oscillating waves of neural spikes? They don't have any of those.
Right, they would do it differently. That's what
it can be different?
Complicated.
Oh, my God. Okay, explain the fundamental thing then, which we can have different expressions of. This I didn't know this was an option.
It's the information processing that is happening.
So your base contention is that the act of processing information generates qualia.
Yeah.
But only sometimes because like a computer program that, whatever, when I click this button, it knows to turn the screen red. That's not conscious, even though it's information processing.
Yeah, it has to be of a certain level. Like computers, at least standard computers, are just executing one by one line. Like, I know the LLMs are also executing line by line, but it is on the higher level where they are processing weights, similar to how neurons process information, that the possible experiencing might happen eventually or could possibly be happening at some small level now.
So I haven't been a super attentive listener. I apologize. But have you guys done the sequence on semantic stop signs yet?
I think we have. I think that was prior to this.
It's been a while.
Do you think that's maybe what you're doing?
Possible, yes.
It sounds like you've taken processing information and just accepted that as a totally legitimate answer in kind of a wide variety of contexts. We're a little unclear on how it applies, but the answer I turn to is that anything processing information obviously generates qualia. Why? Because it's processing information. I feel like we've hit a little bit of a loop.
I'll grant you that.
Okay, good enough.
I cannot come up with anything to counter it.
All right, what's the next note then?
Let's pivot back to zombies. What I really want to dig into. No. I think that because this is actually all good groundwork for it. But like, what I am curious about, and maybe Yudkowsky just didn't do a good job explaining it. And I didn't read The Conscious Mind, so maybe Chalmers does articulate this better than Yudkowsky gave him credit for. But how does Chalmers' zombie write a book about philosophy of mind?
I think the easiest answer is just like a monkeys and typewriter situation.
It gets it right on accident.
Yeah, like it's really weird that would happen, but it's conceivable.
Oh, I was hoping for a better answer.
That disappointment in your voice was so palpable.
If I have a thing, just there's going to be 2 billion universes where he writes a much worse book. There's going to be another trillion universes where he writes a book, but with one different punctuation mark. The fact I don't need it to be likely. I just need it to be coherent. And even if it's only coherent, it necessitates dualism.
Okay, that's fair. I think I follow. So when you first said the typewriting monkeys, I thought that it was just going to say, okay, well, this is just an insane coincidence then. But Chalmers is running with the idea of like, look, let's take this vast hypothetical space of all multiverses. And yes, most of those books will be garbage. But in one of them, they're making the right noises. That's the universe I'm pointing at.
Yeah. Because that's the only one that matters. Yeah. And that's why I was yelling about metaphysics earlier. Because it's important. It's not... Yudkowsky describes this as like a series of complicated, codependent miracles. And it's like, well, it kind of isn't. That's not the point he's making at all.
It sounds to me like Chalmers is just asserting there must be some other thing in the universe without any evidence at all.
Chalmers wouldn't say it like that, but he's definitely asserting that the logic follows that if we have a universe with P being all physical reality and Q some feature of that universe with physical reality, and we have a universe with P but not Q, then P is insufficient to explain all of reality.
We don't have a universe with P but not Q, though.
Sure, but like the argument itself is those 4 statements, and everything else is commentary. That's the structure on which we're commenting when we say we don't have a universe with P without Q. He would argue that it is conceivable, so it is possible, so it follows.
Does he not believe it is conceivable that we have a physical universe without this magical... Okay. I realize using magical is a little bit inflammatory, but I don't know what other word to say for a force that no one can prove exists and seems to do just this one specific thing he wants it to do. Is it inconceivable to him that we have a universe that's just physical laws and doesn't have this magical consciousness element or whatever that results in us being conscious? Because in my opinion, that's literally the universe that we are in right now.
Yeah, sure.
And he cannot imagine that.
No, I'm saying that's fine. That's conceivable, yeah.
Okay, then what's the problem? Like, how could he possibly tell that we are not in that universe and that we're in the one where we have to have this other consciousness fluid that no one can...
Oh, I must have communicated this really badly. He doesn't care which one we're in. It doesn't matter which one we're in for the argument to be valid.
Okay, he's just saying that both could exist in theory.
If both could exist, then his argument is valid. And he would definitely say that your model of a universe is probably conceivable. Although I'd like to... It's not a magical thing no one can prove the existence of, on the grounds that I would contend everyone implicitly does by experiencing. But that's a tangent. Back to your point.
Well, my argument is that everyone does implicitly by experiencing prove that just physics alone creates experiencing. Like, it's equally good evidence for either one.
Perhaps this is simply Can you define physics for me?
Give 3 examples.
I don't think I can.
Physics encompass?
Physics encompasses the natural laws that govern how things interact.
Oh, then he thinks then he would agree with you. He just further thinks that there is a natural law which is not related to the interaction of quarks. Or at least isn't, like, directly.
A law that there's no evidence for.
I am experiencing.
You don't need an additional law to explain that. We just have the regular laws of physics. Like, as long as you're introducing laws that we don't have any evidence for, why not have also that there's a law of goodness and a law of happiness and a law of water? Like, once you get enough H2O molecules close together, the waterness of the universe starts interacting with them, and that's how we get water. Like, you can make up infinite laws of infinite abstract concepts if you wanted.
Yeah, but only one of them is the single thing of which we have the most sure evidence, and which doesn't appear to be accounted for by atoms.
I disagree.
Right. It's very typical for people to agree that they have experience.
Yeah. And since we have experience in a physical universe, that's proof that you can have experience in a physical universe.
That reasoning is circular, though. You're saying because we're in a physical universe, our experiences... And don't get me wrong, I agree with you, but I think that's a bad argument. We're having experiences in a physical universe, therefore we know it's possible to have experiences in a physical universe. Like,
yeah.
What's being postulated here is that there might be something super physical going on. Then all we know is that we're having experiences in a universe, but we don't know if it's one that's that's purely physical or one that has some super physical stuff to it.
Well, I think you need some evidence of the super physical things. Like, I was married to fuck me. I was a Christian when I was, in my very early teens, but I gave that up pretty early on when I gained consciousness. But I was married to a Christian who was in her 20s and would often point to things like the sunrise or a flower and say, like, obviously God exists. Look at all this evidence around you. And I feel like that's the same thing that happens when people say, obviously consciousness exists. Look at your awareness of your own existence. I'm like, what? That's not evidence of God. That's just pointing at something that exists and saying that it's evidence for no reason that I can tell.
I think the difference between that and the consciousness thing is that we can fully account for sunrises. We can explain them without holes. Whereas with any explanation that we currently have of consciousness, we can gesture and say something, neuronal spikes, something, but we can't.
Yeah.
We can't. I can't show you the equation that makes consciousness the way that I can show you how rainbows work. Right?
If that's true, that's just a God of the gaps argument.
It is.
Well, but hang on. Fire being real is a God of the gaps argument because I didn't need to postulate a hot thing that burns me.
Okay.
Oh, I thought that would seem obviously ridiculous. Sorry, I guess...
No, yeah, I think that your philosophical training is that went over my head too. Can you explain like I'm 5?
You can't just say, oh, that's a God of the gaps argument, because you're just saying that this gap is explicable by something that you're trying to describe, because that's just any time you try to describe anything. I'm not saying there's a God with 1,000 unrelated adjacent powers. I'm making like a pretty simple 4-step deductive case. And it relies on what I believe is, for many people, the most obvious intuition about the nature of existence, which is that we appear to experience it.
I will happily grant that I appear to experience things.
Let's walk through the 4 steps and see where we fall off the train here. So step 1, we experience stuff. We're all on board.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I guess by I say we walk through it, Liam, will you walk us through it? I'm not the jump scare expert. Okay. I can try. So like if we can imagine a hypothetical universe where beings aren't. Am I jumping a step here just by jumping straight to the idea of conceivable zombies? Okay, yeah.
Here's the way it needs to go to be as sound as I think it is. Presume for the sake of argument that my premises are correct. If we have a reality featuring the aspects of reality and one specific element of that reality, and that's coherent, and we then have a reality featuring all of those aspects of reality from one. So we have P and Q. We also have P and not Q. So the case we're talking about is consciousness. We have a reality with the laws of physics and experience. If there is any metaphysically possible reality with the laws of physics and not experience, then the laws of physics are necessarily insufficient to explain reality, because even knowing P, I need further information as to whether Q or not Q to differentiate between at least those 2 states. Therefore, Q is separate from P.
I take exception at the second step. To me, that just sounds like we can imagine a universe where striking a match does not cause it to burst into flames. And therefore, that should be entirely reasonable to think of like humans running around in a universe where the matches don't work. It's just not knowing enough about the universe to realize how far-reaching that consequence is and how much would break.
I do wonder, is there a disanalogy that you notice with the the matches not working example? Is that a perfect analogy to what we're talking about here? Because I'm not seeing an obvious disanalogy there.
If matches don't work, I think all of thermodynamics doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, the laws of chemistry themselves would have to be so different that atoms don't work the way that they work on our universe.
It would be hard to even talk about phosphorus.
Right.
No, I totally agree. So I think that was brought up as a case relating to the P zombie thing, because it's like saying, yeah, we have all the brain stuff that makes consciousness, but it's not conscious. That's where okay. The difference there, though, is that we know how matches work and we don't know how neurons make consciousness. Is that the main difference there?
Probably, yeah. I think the case would have to be like, with matches, that's prima facie conceivable. Like, I understand what you're saying. You're not asking me to imagine a pentagonal circle.
Right.
But it isn't ideally conceivable. On reflection, I start to notice some problems that make it logically inconsistent. Mm-hmm. I would argue zombies seems to not be that to me. I don't think I've heard an objection that makes me immediately realize it's completely unbelievable. And actually, let me build off of that. Did you guys ever see that study where they put grad students in an MRI and then showed them a bunch of products they could buy?
I don't remember that one specifically, no.
Okay.
No.
I thought it might have been in the sequences. It might have been from an intro to psych course that MIT released in like 2006. Jeremy Wolf was the lecturer. I highly recommend it. It's really good. So we got these grad students. We didn't. Somebody did. They put them in an MRI.
It was not the Bayesian conspiracy that did this.
Yeah, I wasn't there.
Okay.
And then they played them ads. They gave them like a budget, and they said, well, we're going to watch your brain, you're going to look at the ad, and then you're going to decide, do you want to buy this or do you want to not buy this? I think one of the things they could purchase was like a Foreman grill, pens, pencils, just a bunch of odd things, and then associated prices. And one of the things that they found is that when you ask the student if they've decided yet, there's a huge gap between when they will consciously admit they've decided to do something and when we can detect with the MRI what they're going to say. So it doesn't seem like behavior is actually really related to consciousness. That experience appears to apply retroactively.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one specifically, but I have read of at least one other study that did basically the exact same thing. People, I think it was deciding to push a button or something.
Or raising which arm or whatever, yeah.
Yeah. Real brief tangent on the same thing. Apparently the Neuralink patient that recently got the chips installed in his brain so he can move a cursor around a screen. The cursor will start moving before he is conscious of wanting to move it, but like it always does exactly what he was going to do, which is just the coolest thing.
Doesn't that seem to suggest astounding. That is very cool, for sure.
Yeah.
Don't let me skim past it. But doesn't that sort of suggest that consciousness isn't actually important to human behavior?
It does seem to suggest that.
I would say that makes zombies seem a lot more plausible.
I would not, but I also think that the...
I didn't mean to cut you off. I was going to say I'm reluctantly inclined to agree with Liam there. Like it's possible for me to imagine that this Neuralink's patient's cursor moves around and does stuff, goes to whatever website that he wants to. But if it's doing it all without his experiencing of it doing that, like his noticing.
He's experiencing it. It's just on a delay.
Well, I mean, let's imagine
I can have a delay.
30 minutes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
How big can I make it?
I mean, it's a fascinating question, and it is literally one of those studies, I believe, is what inspired Peter Watts, along with various other things, to write Blind Sight. But the experience concept and the consciousness concept, I think, is getting a little confused at this point, because when you are experiencing things, that's the experience comes after the action. Does this make sense at all?
Yeah, actually, that was the point I was going to try to force you to accept.
Oh, okay.
Great. Go on.
I'm glad we're on the same page.
But are we reading the same book? Because I think that we're still going to disagree.
Why does someone think that the experience wouldn't happen?
It's not that it's not like they think it wouldn't. It's that it's conceivable that it wouldn't. Right?
What I want to say, the reason I think it wouldn't happen is that by introducing this delay, and importantly, a proactive action, so that the delay is in favor of behavior, by introducing that, I've decoupled experience and like the physical stuff that a human body does that could be detected easily by particles.
Okay.
So if I can decouple these, why can't I imagine one without the other?
I suppose you could, but it very much feels to me like the tree falling in the forest kind of thing. If a tree smacks into another tree and they bounce off each other, the sound that comes from that just is going to happen because there's air around. And it doesn't necessarily matter if you can't hear it. Crap. Am I making sense at all here?
No, please proceed.
Okay. The brain action itself is like the two trees hitting each other, and then the experience of it is the sound that comes afterwards. And maybe if you're some distance away, it takes longer for the sound to get to you, but that doesn't change the fact that A, the trees hit each other, and B, they made a sound. The experiencing is the sound. It's an inevitable part of the trees hitting each other.
Okay, what if you're deaf?
I don't know what that would mean in the physical world. That like the analogy of you're deaf. I
guess I'm appealing to very nebulous concepts, and I'm realizing now that I'm not going to be able to drive this one home. Never mind. That one wasn't going to work.
I also apologize if I'm just too dumb to get it.
I don't think that's what's happening.
No, I think that what you were getting at is that like you could still have the trees hitting each other. There could still be no quote unquote sound, and then that person wouldn't be having an experience of it. I guess they might as well not be there.
Yeah, it gets kind of like it's sloppy.
Yeah,
I think it's getting a little slippery there. Zombies, am I right?
Zombies, yeah, fuck those
where
guys.
Are we, do you guys
I'll
usually
kill the next zombie I see.
Down the notes?
We usually go down through all the notes, but at this point we've gotten so far afield, I don't feel like the notes even really apply. Like, we already talked about the whole mirror universe zombie hitting the same keys, and I think the impression Eliezer got was that the zombie hits the same keys because the same laws of physics make the same action potentials travel down to the fingers to hit the keys, whereas Chalmers is saying all that is just a giant coincidence, and in one of the innumerable infinite universes, one of them will happen to be the exact same one as this one.
Well, to be fair, Chalmers would also probably... Hey, Chalmers, please don't yell at me. He would probably also be happy to say that, like, yeah, the reason it wrote the same book is because all those same laws of physics acted upon the atoms inside of his skull, and then they caused action potentials to travel out, and then he typed those words. It's just that was all physics-driven, and the conscious experience of it, which we've established can happen at an arbitrarily long delay, happens to not be there. So you can still have a purely physicalist outlook, and in fact, Chalmers' zombie world is a purely physicalist outlook. They would probably call us, like, weird, except insofar as they're not allowed to, because it's not how the world works.
If you have the same physics, you're going to get the same consequences of those physics, which includes experiencing things.
I think he would agree. He just thinks there's another thing happening also.
Yeah, I do think he thinks that, but why? Like, why would he think that there's another thing happening also?
Many people find the fact of experience inexplicable.
Okay. Well, darn it. I cannot argue with that.
To them, saying your neurons are doing it isn't a sufficient explanation. Like, being told that my neurons are doing it doesn't leave me with, like, I still have the confusion, right? It's totally possible that with super MRIs and the right science that I can now see, oh, okay, I get it. You know, like the same way I understand how cells divide or something, right? Which is to say, I get it at a broad scale, but I'm no biologist. I didn't read Chalmers, but I did read Dan Dennett a lot when I was a teenager. And I remember at least trying to read Consciousness Explained. I love Dennett, and I think Yudkowsky does too, because I think a lot of his stances line up with Dennett's. And Dennett takes the fun philosophical stance, I think, in a lot of cases of like, no, everyone's wrong. You guys are just confused. I think he does that with free will. I think he does that with consciousness. Maybe you know more than I do, Liam, but my vague recollection is that Dennett's position is basically something along the lines of like, it's basically Yudkowsky's, like, but put more gently, maybe, that zombieism isn't actually conceivable. You think it is because we're talking about it, but we're switching, we're kind of flipping back and forth on the C word here. I think that's Dennett's position.
I know Dennett is actually discussed at some length in Chalmers' book.
Oh, nice.
I don't remember exactly what his response to Dennett's arguments were. I know he explains Dennett has like a really complicated, weird model of consciousness, but I was sort of in a hurry to get to the relevant stuff, so I skimmed that chapter.
That's fair. And I think Dennett has a long, complicated position is a fair summary of Dennett's positions on just about everything. Which doesn't mean that they're wrong necessarily, but I think that, especially like I do disagree with Dennett like on free will. And we're not going to dive into it, but just because I think that he's doing exactly what he accuses people of doing, just by flipping the word mid thought, mid conversation.
You know what? Do you guys do show notes?
Yeah, hell yeah, we do.
I'm just gonna show you guys. I just grabbed the chart that's Dennett's position, and I think it'll explain why I didn't spend a great deal of time poring over that chapter. So this is Dennett on consciousness, and I'm hoping for the sake of the listener that this will be injected into the show notes.
It will be injected into the show notes. Oh my god! I mean, it's not the most complicated diagram I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I think that this actually might. If my skim of it is correct, I think this might be what Eneasz is picturing as well.
Yeah, this isn't bad at all.
You guys read that so much faster than I thought could be possible.
Oh, I mean, I skimmed it, but I'm looking at these various words and these various arrows, and I'm like, yeah, this checks out.
All right. Where you lose me is truly, even if all of this was the case, I'm not sure I see how it explains experience. It might teach me how to build a machine that will generate experience, but just like I could look at the schematics for a rocket and still not be able to build another better one. And I would then say, well, you don't really understand rockets. You just followed the instructions in that kit you bought at the hobby shop. That's how I feel about this answer to the question.
Well, okay. I want to tie that into this later note in the zombies post because I was going to bring it up anyway, and I think this is a good tie-in right here. You say you don't explain how this. Okay.
I wanted to agree with Liam that when I said that I think I grokked the diagram here pretty quickly. I also don't see qualia anywhere in here or experience or anything like that. He's basically just, it looks like describing responding to stimuli. And so, yeah, I'm not seeing the hard problem solution in this diagram either, but go ahead, Inyash.
My ultimate question is going to be, why did Chalmers introduce this consciousness fluid or whatever the heck it is idea, and how does that explain anything at all? Because at least according to what I have heard, and Eliezer makes this claim in his post as well, so I'm going to go with it for now, tell me if I'm wrong. The idea is that there's this extra physical law, this consciousness law that does something or another, but the consciousness fluid doesn't interact with the rest of the universe in any way we can measure. It doesn't influence the motion of atoms. It doesn't influence their electrical charge or their mass. There's no way we can measure its influence. The only thing it supposedly does is now I experience things. How does that answer experience? Because that sounds to me just like it's a magic thing.
I can take a shot at it.
Okay.
Oh, but I was ready to defend the plausibility of that on totally different grounds. Okay. I think because part of the reason the hard problem feels like a hard problem is that physics has a certain feel to it. I can wrap my head around how something that I can punch could be understood by punching it differently, right? But unlike all of the other input we get from our senses, this thing we appear to generate independent of sense organs isn't like that in some important way that's difficult to put directly into words. But I'm not sure. I can fathom how I might measure something that I can't see, but I don't know how. I can't fathom how to build a measuring stick for experience. And so that's suggestive if you have faith in the discoverability of truth, that there may be some other thing going on in this one weird case. And therefore, I'm going to postulate, because I know it doesn't interact with atoms in any way I can see, well, one of the facts then I might say I need to think about whatever it is that's causing experience to happen that doesn't seem to interact with atoms. How could it be that something doesn't interact with atoms? I think the property dualists have a pretty okay answer to that, which is, well, whatever this stuff is, it must be downstream of physics. So after physics happens, physics can certainly affect it, but that appears to be kind of a one-way arrow. And the experience happens over there. And then it's very hard to think through much else, because sadly, I'm not the world's most decorated philosophy PhD, and I have not solved the hard problem.
So the argument sounds to be once you get the right kinds of physics, the right particles moving in the right way, once you have the right neurons firing in the right patterns, that causes the consciousness fluid to build up somewhere, and that is what we are experiencing, the buildup of consciousness fluid that these neurons have happened to make happen because of a law of physics we don't know about yet.
I think he usually analogizes to when we figured out magnetic fields, and all of a sudden a bunch of other stuff made sense. I don't know that the solution here is figuring out a new way to look at particles. Maybe there is a thing that doesn't interact with particles, but is still true. I know there are things that don't interact with particles but are true. Math doesn't interact with particles, but I think math is true. So there are versions of knowledge that do not appear to be replicable by physical science machinery. I'm certainly not saying that I think this is magic, perpetually unknowable fluid. I just have no idea how I would go about learning about it. I think that's, if it's true, one of the structural limitations of living in a universe that's shaped like ours, probably. Is it's really hard to get at stuff that I can't punch.
I think that's kind of key to the counter argument there, that if it's true, there's no way to prove it, and it doesn't seem to matter anyway. Why even postulate it? It feels a lot like God.
Maybe you'll find a way to prove it? Can you think of one?
I personally cannot, but if someone else can and does prove it, then I will pay attention. Then Great. I'll be like, oh, maybe relativity does exist. Thank you for pointing out about light dilation.
So there's a typical assumption made by philosophers. And that assumption goes, there are several ways that we can learn truths. One of them is through the application of reason, and this would be one of the reason truths.
What have we learned?
Can you explain the question? What do you mean?
I mean,
we've learned that if it's conceivable that we can have a reality P and Q and a reality P and not Q, then reality is not dissolvable just to P. We learned that. I
guess we always knew that, though.
Did we? I think this guy had to think that thought in the 90s.
Okay. Well, good job, Chalmers.
Yeah, I think it's a fun argument.
As if he needed my accolades, but that's cool.
Making clever arguments for things, I would say, is not a waste of time.
Okay. It certainly doesn't seem to prove anything, though, in the realms of consciousness.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a proof conditional on accepting the premises, and we can fight about the premises. But we've now come to a place where if we ever agree about those premises, then we have proven that we can't reduce to just quarks.
Okay, no, fair enough.
That was really well put. It's kind of funny because, like, rationalist, the way that we use it is not the historical connotation that capital R rationalist has. That was more of like the...
We're empiricists, actually. It's crazy that we picked this name.
Right. I think you guys could comment about that somewhere and maybe just couldn't think of a better name. I can't remember his exact reasoning, but I think he's using rational more in the economic sense as well, too. But you can use conceptual analysis to gain, like, as a valid way to gain knowledge about the world. I do agree, though, that nailing down your premises and making sure you agree on them is core to that whole enterprise. And the stronger the claims that you're making, the more wild they are, the more justification you need. Like you used, a single, an unmarried bachelor earlier. Like, all I have to do is in the rationalist context to, tell you that my neighbor is a bachelor is you therefore know that he's not married, right? You don't even have to do anything empirically. Yeah. That's like the weakest version I could think of a quick rationalist, old school rationalist argument. But this comes up for a couple of reasons. And it does drive back towards kind of the meta point of like zooming way out and thinking about the point of thought experiments like this. Cause I do think it's possible to go way off the rails here. Appreciated our conversation with Bentham's Bulldog, but I think that that he was doing a lot of this kind of conceptual analysis reasoning and thinking he had proven something, or at least made something likely in reality. I don't think he succeeded, at least to my estimation. But the philosophical zombie thing is way easier for me to follow than the conversation we had with Bentham's Bulldog. So like, I can follow it, but I don't know. I guess, yeah. So I think Enash's question is like, what is the, or this is similar to Enash's question, is like, what is the point of him asking this? I think it's because even if the problem isn't hard to you, Enash, like of what it's like to experience something like that has a sensation to it, like that is a confusing thing for a lot of people. And Liam, I want you to correct me because I'm going to be wrong here, but this is kind of like a God of the Gaps argument, except this is a gap unlike ones that we've seen before. And that's, I think, why he's going through all this work to postulate this stuff. And Yudkowsky points out that like the last 3,000 times we thought we saw a unique gap, we were wrong. And I think that Chalmers is wrong too, by the way. But I think that that's why he's making this point, is he's thinking, no, this one for real. And this one we have special access to, unlike the thing, we were wrong about fire, but we weren't the owners of fire the way that we're the owners of our experiences. This is a different kind of problem. Am I anywhere near the mark, or did I lose you guys 3 minutes ago?
No, I actually completely agree. I think I'm very sympathetic to the general hesitance about, well, I found this one thing that I care about is the one that's different from all the others, and so I need a different set of standard. But I do think that the case of experience, just because of how fundamental it is to the fact of being, I think that's one where I'm willing to give a bit of a pass. And to be clear, I don't think it's likely that I'm able to convince anyone that Chalmers is right and we should all abandon physicalism and we need to look more into this magic consciousness soup. What I do think is reasonable, though, is I think rationalists as a group, in the time that I've been around rationalists, have been like way too down on what feels to me like a totally fine argument. It seems fine. That this is not as dumb as it was made out to be by Yudkowsky, in my position.
I want to accept that your framing of all this of, if P and Q, and in a universe there's P but not Q, then that means that Q is not contingent on P. Like, sure, absolutely. But that doesn't, to me, say anything about consciousness itself. And I think that's where people get irritated, annoyed, being like, sure, we accept that logical proposition. And it's cool that someone like made it so apparent in the 90s that this is a thing we can now rely on. But why are you trying to shoehorn in consciousness here that does not apply? That is where the actual "this is the stupidest thing in the world" sentiment comes from. Like, the P and Q thing makes sense.
I have a second contender for the stupidest thing in the world, and it's tightly related. Colin McGinn, another. I think he actually is a philosopher of mind as well, but I don't know if that's his specialty. He's a proponent of what he calls Mysterianism, which is to say that the understanding of consciousness and the solution of it is beyond our. Just like I can't explain calculus to a dog, that's consciousness to us. I think that's a dumb. I mean, I don't know if that's. I think Yudkowsky might not say that's a dumber argument, but I'm way less sympathetic to that one than I am. I'm at least sympathetic to Chalmers. I don't think. Again, I don't think I agree with him. I like that he took a stab at it rather than throwing his hands up and saying, "Well, I can't figure it out. It's impossible."
I think the reason that this comes up as a conversation about consciousness is that for people who have the intuition that the hard problem is hard, once you see the logic he's laying out, this is at least a meaningful critique of physicalism. And that's more how it's presented in his book, which is itself not like just a screed on why he's right about zombies, but spends a lot of time thinking about the ways that we might think about the fact of experience. And as that, I think it's completely legitimate. It is a clever way to at least cast some doubt on the idea that necessarily all universes must be reducible to P.
So the zombies thing was like clickbait from the 90s.
Except it happens halfway into the book, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the book is called The Conscious Mind. It's not called Philosophical Zombies. And I imagine maybe if you wrote the book in 2010, it would have been called, Zombies or Consciousness Zombies or something, right? But yeah, luckily this came out before clickbait.
Was clickbait not around in the 90s? I think I've seen some old yellow journalism pieces that predated 96.
No, yeah, you make a good point. There's definitely shocking headlines that are supposed to be attention grabbing, and he could have gone for something like that. But I guess maybe the point here is that the philosophical zombie thing is an argument that he uses to help illustrate the point that he's making in the the broader context of the book. It's not the point of the book. Kind of like maybe Sam Harris's Waking Up isn't called Why You Should Take Psychedelic Drugs.
Is that one of the major arguments of the book?
No, but it's in there.
Okay.
Well, he's arguing that he made an argument compelling enough that I tried psychedelic drugs.
Oh, nice.
Was he right?
His case, I'd have to look back, and actually it might not have been in the book. It might have been on an essay back when people still wrote essays and didn't just do podcasts. Because it was either
these are audio essays, sir.
It was either a chapter called "Drugs and the Meaning of Life" or it was an essay called that. I think it was an essay, and I don't remember what his whole point was. Other than that, if I remember correctly, the idea was that the right kind of psychedelic experience can speed run you straight to the truth of understanding that there is no central I of like yourself. And I think it does do that. It can do that anyway, especially if you like, I didn't do it to, go to a party and have a crazy time. I did it like deliberately and seriously and tried to introspect while it was happening. And that is what came out of it.
Nice.
You come out realizing that picture you have in your head of who you are and who you're supposed to be is just a picture. Like there is no actual thing there. So yeah, I think that he did successfully argue that, but waking up is about other avenues towards that as well, I think. Actually, she would like it. The subtitle is Spirituality Without Religion.
I absolutely should read that then.
I'm actually curious if you'd love or hate it. It's very philosophy style writing, but Sam Harris isn't crazy, so it's not just like putting hoity-toity language on top of bullshit. So I'd be curious about your takeaway from it.
All right, I'm totally down for that.
Nice.
I think we've basically covered a lot of this post. Not really the post itself, but the meat of it. You guys, what else? What have we not hit? What did you want to talk about, which we haven't gotten to?
I don't know if there's a quick answer to maybe I kind of answered it in my own ramblings of why someone would lay out a long thought experiment like this. And it's to try and analyze a problem from a complicated problem from a different angle, I think maybe is the takeaway. What would you say there, Liam?
I don't understand the question. I'm sorry.
In general, like what motivates people to make somewhat convoluted arguments, like this, or and I'm not being uncharitable, but like Bentham's somewhat anthropic proof for God or something. I guess that's what motivates them. And maybe that varies from person to person. I do want to hear your answer, but I'm curious. Say, okay, you've made this really cool argument and I kind of buy it, but like, what am I supposed to do with that? I believe your argument, but now what?
Well, it depends on the argument. There's definitely a type of person who would say that making arguments of this type is important because the pursuit of truth is important. And by making arguments, there are people who think we can learn things that are true. Some of these people we would call mathematicians. Could you explain to me the point of doing math?
Some people like it, and it bears fruit in real life.
Yeah, that's the thing.
There are people who do just like theoretical math, and they seem to just enjoy it.
Philosophy bears fruit in real life all the time, though. Come on, we know it does.
Oh yeah, no, I wasn't saying it doesn't. I was just, maybe from context that was a reasonable read on what I said, but no, yeah. I was just saying that.
I admit I might be biased in that I like making complicated arguments for sport. I really enjoy fun arguments. It's just a good way to spend your day. That's why I spend a bunch of time on that Discord arguing with people. What else would I do? But to defend philosophy broadly, I think it's important to practice thinking, to learn how to be good at thinking. I think it's important that when we practice thinking, we're doing it on real problems. And so an anthropic argument was made for God, apparently, recently. That seems fine. Yeah. If you can come up with a cool reason to think something that seems unintuitive, even if you can come up with a cool reason to think something that's not true, maybe now you've learned something about what kinds of reasons you should believe, There's always a value somewhere.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I think your flexing muscle's worth flexing. And I think sometimes it's easy to flex a muscle in a useless way that like does nothing but actually hurt your limb. But that doesn't mean that like the idea of kind of training those muscles is bad in principle, but you can't do it wrong. And I'm not saying philosophers do that in general. I'm saying that it's definitely possible. And it's not just philosophers. I had at least one more question. Do you have any thoughts on non-organic brains? Like, do you think uploading is possible in principle?
The only model of uploading that I think I would be satisfied with is the version where I have nanobots trade out my neurons one at a time. I'm personally incredibly nervous about any break in continuity because I'm not sure I know what the thing that is me is. I only know that I currently experience. There was a time in my life when I avoided sleeping a lot more than I should have because I was concerned that might be dying in like important ways.
Nice. Yeah, it's good that you were standing by what logic revealed to you, right? That's pretty fucking based in my opinion.
So I would love to be on board with uploading, but I don't think I have a coherent enough theory of life to say if it would kill you or not. Definitely post-upload, you're good. And I'm almost certainly 100% on board. But it's like the teleporter thing. The other guy gets to be fine, but did I die in the way that I would care about?
I think that's a teleporter problem too, and I wouldn't mind stepping into a teleporter for the same reason I don't mind going to sleep or whatever, right? Like, that said, I'm with you. Or at least I think I am halfway where like I'm not going to sign up for the first round of uploads. I'll wait for round 2. Here's a question for both of you guys. Like, so I've got lots of contingencies for lots of random things because I'm kind of crazy like that. For example, if somebody from the future claimed to be me, they could prove it, or they could at least prove that they could read my mind. So like that's similar to how I would know, like if I was uploaded and the original me wasn't destroyed, I would know if the one in the computer is me or not, or at least I think I would. So like hypothetically, you've got a long passphrase that only you know, and you're like, that's how I'm going to test. I'm gonna ask the computer if it knows my secret passphrase. If it does, it therefore has all my memories. Do you think that's possible? And Inyash, I'm kind of curious if you think it's possible for like an emulation of you to know that password without being conscious.
Who would you like to answer these questions first?
Liam, go first.
Okay. I can't think of a single reason that wouldn't be possible, because surely you could just simulate at Planck scale the volume of my brain. I just don't think I care if it can do that.
What do you mean?
So what?
Well, I guess because like it'd be cool to have a not vulnerable squishy meat brain and one that was more robust to damage.
Oh yeah, that would be cool but like I can say this better. It would definitely be cool, and it would be nice to have a instance of myself like running on my home server. But I don't think that saves me in the way that I care about from being a squishy meat brain.
You have an attachment to your meat suit that you're reluctant to give up, if I'm hearing you correctly.
No, fuck the meat. This stuff is gross. Get it off me. Horrible. You ever accidentally think about your eyes? Like, there's just two little globes of jelly living inside you, and you can never take them out. And that's your life now, forever.
And your bones are wet. It's weird.
So I love you guys. This is awesome.
Then why wouldn't you care? Why didn't you find it interesting that'd be doable? Because I'm with you. Like at the very least, maybe it's possible through simpler means, but like it should be something. It should be totally doable to being something like functionally isomorphic to human neurons that are just swap them out for transistors and they do the exact same thing.
But you're just describing a different person.
I feel like I'm describing me just on a different substrate.
Sure, but I see what we're doing here. But like I care about my stream of experience. So if you have a copy of me, we can probably collude really effectively, but that's still just an additional stream of information entering my experiential world. My stream of experience is not now in a machine. Now there is a second thing over there that's a machine that's very similar to me in ways that I think are important about myself, but not the one where I it's for reasons unrelated to why I worry about dying.
Right. You have to terminate the meat suit at the instant of transferring over. And I know you're going to disagree with that, but
okay.
That is my stance.
Then I won't explain why I disagree. We all get it.
Yeah. We already know.
So, Inyash, do you think it'd be possible for the uploader to you to know your password and not be conscious?
I mean, it depends on how good the upload is. Oh, and not be conscious?
Yeah.
If the simulation is good enough, like Liam was saying, down to the Planck level, and I suppose if you didn't run it, if you could somehow extract that information by looking at all the various connections, you might be able to find it. But like, if it's running, then it's conscious.
I think I'm inclined to agree. I was just kind of curious to tickle your guys' brains with that sort of thought experiment. I didn't have like a broader point I was making there.
Okay, so you think that would be conscious?
If it was running, yes.
If it was running. What if I take like a step back away from that? I run that again, but I do it on like one of those old mechanical adding calculators.
Yeah.
Really big one.
Right. Or in XKCD, if it's just a guy making a Turing machine out of rocks on the beach, but he lives for forever. Yes, that would also be conscious.
You think the rocks would have experience?
Not the rocks themselves, no, but the
the neurons
system.
Aren't conscious. It's the collection. I see.
Wait, hang on. No, wait. The
Turing machine.
When?
I can't answer that question. What am I, some sort of physicist?
At rock 2,705,000,000.
How many rocks do I need to move, and how fast do I need to move them before experience emerges?
I don't know how much the speed matters. As many rocks as there are quarks in your brain, probably?
No, there's synaptic connections, at least, maybe.
Right, whatever the relevant metric is, at least that many. And since it does, come from a pattern, and at least the argument on Astral Codex 10 was it seems to be a minimum of 80 milliseconds before like a thought can really cohere, then however many frames you would have to simulate to make up 80 milliseconds of changes happening.
Okay.
Wonderful book called Permutation City that actually asks this exact question. And like the first chapter is so fucking bizarre because the guy runs his simulated self, and doesn't run it like in time order. He runs it at 1 second, and then at 8 seconds, and then at 3 seconds, and just to see what happens. And the him that's on the inside feels like all of them happen consecutively. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's fucking amazing book.
That sounds awesome.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
And that's just the first chapter. It's fantastic.
That does sound good. I'll write that one down.
It's, in my opinion, people disagree with me. In my opinion, it's kind of a horror book because of the things that it does with consciousness. But other people don't find it quite as horrific as I do.
Based on this conversation...
It came out 2 years before Chalmer's book.
Oh, interesting.
Oh.
Based on this conversation?
Oh, I'm just not worried at all.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. You were saying, I wanted to interrogate you a little bit you were saying that if you had your neurons replaced slowly one at a time by a functional equivalent neuron that's, I don't know, made out of silicon or carbon nanotubes or whatever, something that isn't our squishy bio neurons, that would be acceptable to you. You would feel like the same person, the same consciousness?
I think so. I can't come up with any way that it could go wrong.
What if, like, the consciousness fluid that is activated by the universe only happens in water and carbon chain atoms?
Then I guess I would die.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Like, hopefully that isn't it.
Yeah, at some point along the replacement, you would die.
And I guess you would just slowly, your consciousness would fade out as the neurons are replaced one by one, and you would never notice until there's no consciousness left.
Actually, I guess, no, because I think... Yeah, I don't know. It's a hope and a prayer situation. Like, I wasn't going to live forever already. So if that one's ever on the table, it's probably worth going for it.
Yeah. In the generalized anti-zombie principle, which is what I think probably reminded me and Steven about the replacing neurons with chips thing, there's a hypothetical switch that someone could push. It will not affect your brain in any way that anyone can see, doesn't affect the atoms, the quarks. But if the switch is flipped, then I will cease to be conscious. I guess maybe by interfering with the consciousness fluid or something. Is this hypothetically a thing you could believe in?
Well, you've just said that it's the hypothetical, so yes. That's how engaging in hypotheticals work.
Yeah. Damn it, you're right. Okay.
You set it up. So what?
I did. I guess my question would be, do you think that could happen in real life? But that all comes down to whether do you believe in consciousness fluid, and it seems like you don't know.
I don't really believe in consciousness fluid, no. I just think it's a good argument. Okay. I don't know. Maybe I don't really know how consciousness works. Maybe you could have a switch that turns it off. In a sense, that's what an anesthesiologist does a lot of the time. So maybe that's what the anesthesia does. It interferes with the consciousness fluid collecting. It does, because ultimately, I think I would just say that, like, my big high-level note on all of the generalized anti-zombie, it feels to me like it's arguing against an argument that Chalmers never made.
Well, maybe. I think it's at least an argument that he implied. Like, one of the quotes that I pulled out earlier was Chalmers, this appears to be a direct quote from the book. Chalmers says, "The question is whether I am justified in the belief, not whether my brain is justified in the belief." That just, I think that is entirely indicative of the confusion going on here, that Chalmers, for some reason, thinks that he and his brain are different things when he is his brain. We are all our brains.
Well, he does think he is perfectly entangled with the neurons in his brain.
Okay.
So, like,
then how can he say, like, it's just not my brain being justified in the belief, I want to be justified too? What's the difference there if he's perfectly entangled? Not that you necessarily need to speak for him.
I've been doing it a lot.
My own quick takeaway on that would be that I don't think that it's possible to say my brain believes anything.
But I don't know a way to... How would you say that would make sense to such a staunch physicalist?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how the physicalist would explain to me that your brain believes something. They would be referring to, like, I hate the word emergent, but the emergent nature of this neuronal firing, etc., like that forms something like an entity that could like make judgments about things and have beliefs, but it's not like it has them, right?
I guess it's fair to say that like the word brain refers specifically to the physical object and not necessarily the pattern of information within it. Like you can have a brain that isn't processing information because it's dead. So in that way, I get the distinction, but I don't think that is the distinction he was trying to make there. I think he was trying to make some more metaphysical, spiritual distinction.
I really think reading Chalmers' spiritual doesn't align with what I saw in his actual book. I think what he might be trying to say is something like, and you're not going to like this any better, but I think it's what he was trying to say. We have, I described that sort of parallel, entangled, additional fundamental force, if you will. Yeah. We have his brain, and his brain via the interaction, the one-way interaction with this additional fundamental law of reality, creates a thing which is experience. The experience is something I might want to talk about as being more important than the brain. Like I was just saying, I'd be more comfortable with replacing neurons one at a time because I'm afraid of breaking the experience. I would happily trade away my fleshy neuron brain for a durable silicon brain. But the I, the me, who could be justified, importantly, is still the same experiencer and not object. And it's easy to get stuck in weird loops with that kind of thinking. I don't think it's necessarily internally incoherent, but that is just like psychiatrists often say, like the mind is what the brain does. We're describing a higher order effect of a thing as distinct from the individual sardines in the cloud.
I haven't heard the term sardines in the cloud before. That was quite the visual image.
Well, but okay. Sardines school, right? That's...
Yeah.
Okay, good.
It took a second, but yeah, that was cool. I guess I don't have as much of a beef with that line as I did when I was initially reading it.
Great. That was much of my goal.
Huzzah!
Yeah. Do you have things you want to drill us about or bring up, Liam?
Yeah, just while it's on the topic, I want to bring up an argument for dualism that Descartes made, because it was like my favorite when I was a kid, and it's on topic and I really like it. I don't think it actually works. I think it breaks in some important ways, but I think it's fun. And it goes like this. I can tell a story, and if I was telling the story, I might discuss waking up in the morning and getting out of bed, and I might talk about putting on coffee, and then I could go to the bathroom, and when I look in the mirror, I might see that there's nothing there. I might realize that all I'm seeing is the wall behind me, like vampire style. And isn't it weird we can do that and it'll make sense? Like we can tell a story about ourselves without ourselves in it? If the person is the body, then isn't it strange I can tell a story about the body, but there is no body? I can't do that with like a table, right? I can't tell you a story about this desk that I'm sitting at, but the desk isn't in it. And I can't tell you about a story about a star, but the star isn't there without it no longer being a story about that star in the way that I'm talking about stories being about something. And so, Descartes claimed, it must follow that when we talk about the self, we aren't talking about the body, but we're talking about something else, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to tell stories like this. It would sort of fall through.
I think that's a fun thought experiment.
Okay. I think you have to claim that I'm just lying about what the story is about, right?
Well, for me, it just sounds like you're telling a story about an invisible person. And that sounds like I'm ducking the point of the thought experiment. But like you said that he put on coffee, and whatever. Like, so he's touching stuff. Like, so the meat, the body is doing something, even if he can't see it. But
sure. Let's say that he can experience the sensation of moving things around. Or let's say he can touch things. We'll cut coffee. We'll just wake up in the morning. The door was already open. I can feel the bed, but I don't move it. Like I can make minor adjustments to account for that without breaking the core of the...
Yeah, I knew I was getting bogged down on the wrong point there. It's fun to think about. There's nothing essential. I might need to think about this for another second. Do you have any immediate feedback there, Inyash?
Yeah, I think it's an indication that we think of ourselves as the thoughts within our minds. I don't think that's a new revelation necessarily. We don't necessarily think of ourselves as our bodies. Like Liam was saying just a little bit ago, how gross and weird it is that we have these two jelly sacks in our skulls. But but those are part of us. If you feel particularly unembodied, the thoughts within our minds that are running on our brains are it's information, right? It's a bit of an abstracted thing, and that is how we think of ourselves in the abstract, not as bodies, but as these information processes. And that is why you can think of that. It couldn't actually happen in the real world, but it feels like it could, because we feel like thoughts from the inside.
Well, I think it's relevant to this discussion how it sort of cleanly gets at a distinction between the physical reality of existing in a body with pus, fluids, and what we perceive as like the experiential elements of existing, which and how cleanly we can seem to separate those. And that's a very powerful intuition for many people. I really like the argument. It took me like a long time to figure out why it didn't work.
Oh, good. Then I don't feel bad that I couldn't do it in 5 seconds.
Why is it that you think it doesn't work? Like, what was your revelation?
I think ultimately you kind of can tell stories about things where the thing isn't there. I think the example was when we look at stars, they're really far away, which means they're really long ago. And I actually could tell a story about a star in a universe where the star doesn't exist. Because I can still look at it. I would have no way of knowing it doesn't exist. And I can, in the same way I can narrate, this isn't like physics, but in the same way I can narrate about waking up, I can narrate about looking at a star, but it's true inside the story that what I'm looking at isn't a star, even though it feels like it is. And so I think like it just isn't as persuasive as... But on first blush, I love it.
I'm going to reference that ACX post again, and at this point, I think we just have to have an episode with the guy to talk about it, because it's fantastic. But he does bring up a lot of the inputs that we get from our bodies are just not incorporated into the central me loop. And so we don't notice, like right now, the feeling of the chair against your butt. Now you're noticing it if you're trying, because I just mentioned it, but we weren't until a second ago. And that's because it's not incorporated in that central me loop while we're doing other things, because we're concentrating on other things. We don't want to be slowed down by all that other input on us. That's the kind of intuition that the story gets to, that there's a lot of things that are just not in that central loop most of the time because they don't need to be.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
that would be interesting. I'll listen to that episode. Let me know.
Okay, no problem.
All right. Well, I got to ask then, if you asked if the show had show notes, it makes me wonder how you found the Discord without knowing that the show had show notes. What brings you into our little community?
Yeah, Johnny, person who talks a lot on the Discord, was one of my Ethics Bowl teammates.
Nice.
So I knew him, and then he subjected all of you to me.
Oh, no.
I'm going to have to thank Johnny, because you're awesome.
Exactly. Yeah, subjected is the wrong word there. Graced us with your presence. I'm glad he dragged you in.
Yeah, no, of course. No, he told me that it was there, and I then COVID hit. So I read the entire backlog and then was pretty convinced.
The entire backlog of the Discord?
Yeah.
It was
I guess
new
it must
at
have
that
not
time.
been quite that much yet. Yeah. Okay.
It was right when COVID happened. I had a lot of free time. I didn't want to feel like I'd missed context. I think I have still read everything that has been posted in the Bayesian Conspiracy Discord.
Good
Damn.
God. I can't say I've read 1% of it.
Right?
I mean, I can, but I think I might be lying.
Okay.
Anyway, that's awesome.
Just in the main channel or in the entire Discord?
No, the whole thing.
Jesus Christ. I have like half the channels muted because they're not interesting.
Now and then,
insane.
somebody says something silly in one of them, and I need to be ready.
Okay.
Well, we thank you for your service.
Yeah, absolutely. Damn, dude, we should make you Discord archivist or something.
It's fine. I don't remember all of it. But I don't do social media as a rule. This is the only one. So it's,
hey, same
plenty
here.
of time.
High five.
We are honored to have you.
We'll plug your podcast that discusses the Terra Ignota series. But I guess I was going to ask where else can people find you. But the answer, I guess, is nowhere. The Bayesian Conspiracy Discord.
Yep, you can find me there. I'm very accessible. I'm the one that's called Liam. I also am a co-host on 2 Rash, 2 Unadvised. That's 2 as in the number 2. We read through books and talk about philosophy, and usually I don't find myself bound by the desire to prove that something isn't dumb, so I'm making much worse but much more fun points. Right now we're going through Lent.
Tell us really quickly what Lent is.
Lent is hard to describe without getting too deep into... So Lent is a story about Giovanni Savonarola, a Dominican monk who lived in Florence during the Renaissance, who is famous for burning a bunch of things that people liked.
Okay. Awesome. Is this like a biography then?
It is a lot like a biography. It is a fictionalized retelling of his life in a universe wherein he isn't wrong about God. It's pretty good.
Oh, that's cool.
I recommend it.
Who's the author?
Joe Walton is the author. Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay, cool.
If you'd like to catch up on that, we're available on whatever podcast thing you have, probably. If you find one that we're not on, please let me know.
Well, thanks, Liam. This was great. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I'm always down to talk philosophy, so I'll find you on Discord more. You've inspired me to try to hit 1% of the Discord, and I'll find you around there more often.
I am always willing to argue about things. I think I've lived up to that, and I intend to continue.
Awesome.
Yes. All right. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the Discord. Bye.
Later.
Steven, welcome back.
Thanks, Eneasz. How you doing?
I am doing good.
You're doing well. Superman does good.
Oh, son of a bitch.
You're the one who shared that quote with me once, so...
Cool. I'm glad that it stuck around.
Yep. Just in time to throw right back in your face 8 years later, or however long it's been.
Oh man. That was primo stealth move, like just holding on to it for 8 years, waiting for the perfect opportunity.
There it was.
Oh, beautiful.
Glad to hear you're doing well, and you're doing good. I think you're doing both.
I try.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, just in my own little way. I'm not doing as much good as a lot of other people, but
not as much good as Superman, but who can compete? So.
Right. I mean, he's literally super.
Speaking of doing good, you know who does good real well is the Guild of the Rose.
They do good really well by helping people to level up their rationality and doing so in a community setting, from what I've heard.
Yep, that's what I hear too. They're easy to find at guildoftherose.org. We partner with them because they share our mission statement of raising the sanity water line and trying to make the world a better place by making people better thinkers, and more specifically, or more generally and specifically with the Guild, better in every aspect of your life. Practical skills, mental and physical wellness, rational thinking, even something akin to, spiritual well-being. If anyone listening to this hasn't checked out the website, message me and explain why, maybe. If you're not going to check out the website, I guess you won't do that either. But just give it a click. guildoftherose.org. It's so cool. The skill tree looks awesome. They've got tons of resources, and everyone there that I've ever talked to is awesome.
Importantly to me, they're helping to raise the general sanity waterline of society as best as they can in their limited way, because none of us is Superman, but all of us working together can start to get close to Superman.
Together we can surpass Superman.
Exactly.
I mean, Lex basically did it single-handedly, so...
Yeah. I mean, if only we had real Lex Luthors.
Yeah.
Wait, no, I take that back.
Cheats, so.
Yeah, that would be terrible.
Batman.
And who doesn't care about humans.
Batman,
there we go. Yes.
We're torturing the metaphor too far, but the point stands. Check out guildoftherose.org to check out the tools and community you need to succeed at whatever it is you're trying to do.
Yep. Or link in the show notes if you prefer that.
Yes.
Real quick, before we go on to thanking the patron, we just had this great conversation with Liam about the zombies. It occurred to me the next day as I was editing the podcast. Mainly I was defending physicalism here, and I was happy to do that. I had a great time. I have no complaints whatsoever. But I do have a few questions about Chalmer's whole consciousness thing and what the heck it even is supposed to do, which I didn't get to ask, which, again, in 2 hours runtime, not like I was going to go around. But I do have a few questions, and so I went back and messaged you and Liam afterwards and be like, hey, can I ask you guys these questions? It'll probably take an hour, maybe a little longer. And you guys both said yes, and so we are going to do that for our next episode as a follow-up episode where I get to ask Liam about his weird beliefs as opposed to him asking me about my weird beliefs. So that's coming up in 2 weeks.
Sounds fun.
More zombies.
Well, more. I think at least philosophy of consciousness. I think zombies will probably come up, but yeah, I mean, as you guys no doubt observed in the episode, we strayed pretty far from zombieism just because so much of it is laying out the groundwork, and it turns out that we didn't share the same groundwork. So a lot of it was trying to find that commonality there. I think we did pretty well, and I think we made much more progress in the subsequent 2 days worth of Discord chat, which attached to this episode will be a link to a doc that has a cleaned up version of that where you guys can see the discussion there, and some of it will probably make it into the episode, but if I'm going to go through the trouble of editing this, then I'm going to at least go through the trouble of posting it. So
nice. So yeah, if you want even more discussion where we clear up a few things, there is a note to, I don't know, probably couple thousand words that we exchanged on the matter.
Yeah, at least a couple thousand.
All three of us, I think, thought it was quite interesting. So there's that.
Everyone thought it was interesting enough to agree to let me share it. So
exactly. So that will be our next episode, which means that we will once again not have less wrong posts in that episode. So no less wrong posts for next episode because it's going to be a little bit more on this issue before we continue.
Yep.
And finally, our favorite part of the show where we thank somebody who has been generously supporting us, who has somehow decided that part of the use of their conscious... No, that's not working.
I could tell when you started that you're going to try and find a way to shoehorn it in.
And
it wasn't a free will episode; it was a consciousness episode.
Yeah, I was about the shit.
Let me give it a shot. Okay. Eneasz and I are both experiencing appreciation and gratitude towards our supporter this episode, who Eneasz gets the pleasure of naming this episode.
That was really well done. Thank you, Stephen.
I try my best.
Our supporter this episode is Cool Pseudonym.
That's a pretty cool pseudonym.
Cool Pseudonym, thank you so much for helping support us and helping to bring the show to all of our listeners. So we can all be grateful to you right now for doing that thing. So thanks.
Yeah, you rock. And have one of the coolest internet names ever. We really appreciate your support. Thanks again. If anyone else is interested, there's a link to the Patreon and Substack in the show notes. If you're paying your Patreon subscriptions through your iPhone, they're changing the terms and conditions on that to where Apple's going to get their 30% cut. So I think that's either going to reduce what the content creators get by 30% or increase what you pay by 30%. I'll need to find the fine print on that again, but I didn't read it that closely because I do it through the web interface. So, but just for anyone out there who's interested, it may well apply to you. So
you can always rate and or review us and maybe just recommend the podcast episode if you find a really good one that you like. You're like, oh, this was so interesting. I wonder if my friends would like to know about why death is bad or about why zombies are crazy or, or possibly explain everything depending on your point of view. So you can always rate, review, share with people. Those things are also greatly appreciated.
They are. And I always try to remember to do that and I always forget. Maybe I should put that in the notes here or something. But yeah, I mean, that helps a lot. And, yeah, share it with somebody if you think they'll find it fun. That's how I find all my fun stuff, if someone tells me about it. So,
yeah, same here.
Great.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Stephen. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Bye.